emotional comfort.
Emotional support water.
Because I don't drink coffee, so.
My coffee's mostly chocolate. With that homemade chocolate syrup.
We decided to do a coffee chat this time, not our book.
1/2 coffee, 1/2 whiskey.
It was my turn to choose, and I chose the Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. This is a chat.
This is a chat. My initial thought was I didn't want to read it. I know it's a me problem, but I'm always slow to connect with things set in Africa. And this book, for those of you who may not know, is about a family whose father is like a Southern Baptist preacher, and he moves the whole family to the Congo.
Set in the 60s, right?
50s, yeah. So that he can go save all the souls in Africa. He says there's 1 million souls in Africa, and he's going to save them all.
I don't think he saves any of them.
I don't think he saves any of them. If anything, he makes things a lot worse for a lot of people.
He's probably the worst character in the book, and worst as in he's just. It's not that he's a badly written character. He's just terrible.
He's not probably the worst. He is irrefutably a horrible dude. There is nothing redeeming about him, in my opinion.
Yeah. I listened to it, as I often listen to books, and I bet it was probably easier for me to listen to than to read because it is densely written. It's very well written. Mm-hmm. But you can kind of tell from the writing that, wow, this is a very good writer, but also there's a lot of content to kind of like digest as you're listening or reading.
It's definitely not a light read, and that's okay. I mean, like you said, it's really well written. It's well crafted. It's just you have to be, I think, fully engaged reading it. I definitely have read some books here lately where I can fly through them because you don't have to like engage the full brain, but I think you do here. It was the runner-up for
a Pulitzer?
Yes, for a Pulitzer. So.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
It did not win, but it was nominated, and it was like the runner-up for a Pulitzer. So it's an exceptional piece of writing.
Yeah. As an author, she has a real eye for kind of, or a real sense for engaging characters who are well fleshed out and very believable. I feel like all of her characters are very believable. There wasn't anything about any specific person that I'm like, oh, that seems contrived or something like that. I just felt like they were all very lifelike, and I really enjoyed it.
Except for maybe Nathan.
Well,
he wasn't as fleshed out, but he didn't have to be. One thing that's really, I think, neat about this is this book changes perspectives.
Frequently.
So you get the perspective of the 4 daughters. So it's Nathan and the mother Orleana, and then their 4 daughters. Ruth May, who is 5, all the way up through
16,
Rachel, who is
16
when they first moved there. And you never have to hear a chapter told from the perspective of a man. It's only in the women's perspective.
I didn't even think about that. It didn't strike me as a thing that was odd.
I don't think it's odd. I think it's nice. And I do think that's why perhaps the father's character doesn't feel quite as robust because you don't get his perspective. But he's so awful, I don't want his perspective. I don't need to hear his background.
About that.
No, I think that it's neat. It's a very feminist piece of literature, I think. And we see a lot of different women, especially as the book shifts. And after that major event that rocks everyone, they all go all these different ways. We have a whole lot of different lives that unfold for the different women. And I think that is really cool. They have a lot of power. You
said as you were getting to that part that you're like, oh, it feels like a lot of wrap up to be this. And I said that I kind of felt that way at first when I first kind of was getting into it. But as I got to the end of the book, I actually really liked that section of the book that's kind of after the event. And it's not even exact. I wouldn't even say after Africa because it's not all.
No, it's
after
Africa. January 17th.
Right. Yeah. It's after that day.
Yeah.
I appreciated reading this that there's a risk of a white Southern woman kind of writing a book about Africa. And I think personally that she did a really good job of not kind of writing a, how do I say that? Well,
I was hesitant to get into it because we've got this Southern family moving to Africa to save all the little African souls, and it felt like it could go really wrong into that offensive white savior domain, but it doesn't because it's very critical, and even within like the characters themselves, they are pretty self-aware of
Yeah.
that they are out of place, that they don't belong there,
Right.
and that they are not doing this saving work that their
Right.
father thinks they are.
And I think one of the biggest conclusions that kind of come from all of it is that Africa doesn't need to be saved. It didn't need the colonizers to come in. It doesn't need the missionaries to come in.
It doesn't need America to send their weapons. It doesn't need all of those
Right.
things because they're just fine on their own.
Yeah.
Which I think is something that Africa has been dealing with for centuries. And that's another thing that this book is interesting to me. I personally have not read a ton of things set in Africa, and like I mentioned earlier, some of the things that I have done, it's slow for me to connect, and I think that is, that global difference that we have. And I also don't know a lot about the history of these different African nations, and like, this is true to the history. It is a fiction book, but the history is true.
Yes.
So we see a lot of the Belgian rule over their area, and
Congo.
Yeah, I had no idea. I had no idea that Belgium had control of the Congo. And
No, I didn't either.
that's definitely a shortfall on my own world knowledge that I need to fill those gaps.
The language of majority at the time, when they were in the book, is Congolese and French, which I think is because of the Belgian influence. I kind of sobbed a little bit through some of this. I don't know, there's something about the loss of a child or something that hits me when I'm listening to it.
That's fair.
I
think it was very obvious to me from very early on that this family was not going to leave Africa unscathed. Like,
right.
I knew that one of these children was going to die.
And the book doesn't try to hide the fact before it happens. So, I mean, I was prepared for there to be loss, but it's actually more the effect of the loss afterwards that kind of got me, and the perspectives of how it affected everyone, and the emotions that they're going through, and things like that, that really kind of, I don't know.
It decimated the whole family, I think. I mean, it destroyed the whole family. And it's really frustrating.
It was on the verge of collapsing anyway, but
I really wanted Orleana, the mother, to have stepped up for her daughters prior to collapse. It's like, well, if you had just taken action a week ago, a day ago, a month ago, 6 months ago, this could have been avoided, and you would be leaving with 4 daughters instead of 3. But she didn't, and you kind of understand why she couldn't, and I guess she needed that loss to embolden her to take action against her husband. But God, I was just like, be a mother to your children, and don't just stand idly by while your misguided husband destroys your lives.
Yeah.
I was very frustrated with the mother, and to me, she's not redeemed.
Well, and even afterwards, I feel like she doesn't particularly step up as a mother, and they kind of talk about that.
She doesn't.
But I think that her character, and I was maybe not exactly sympathetic, but she has spent her whole life being somebody that she didn't want to be.
She's stifled.
And that by the time there was a catalyst that caused her to say no more, she just couldn't be part of that life anymore. And so, like, she felt it was necessary to take care as a mother somewhat, but not to actually step into this caring role that she wanted her to be in, because she's just not capable of it anymore. About how she still even then did raise money and do charity work and stuff for her, which I thought was interesting.
She always seems to be able to do good for others, but she can never quite step up when it comes to her own home, which is really frustrating to read. And I feel like maybe my perspective as a mother, I'm like, well, damn, you should have just taken care of your kids before it got to that moment. It's not like the signs weren't there.
Yeah.
But of course, we are talking about a woman at that point in the early 60s. I mean, it's not like she could just. And she's in the Congo. It's not like she could just go divorce her husband. What was she going to do?
A lot about Congolese history that I didn't realize, and it's very well researched. She kind of talks about before she in the preface or something like that she did a lot of research on this, and
there's a pretty extensive bibliography in the back, which I appreciate. She did the work to make sure that the things she was talking about were authentic and not just some white woman just making up stories about the Congo.
Right. I guess I probably knew it was a colony. Almost all of Africa has been a colony at some point.
But a Belgian colony?
But a Belgian colony. And that they allowed them to vote for independence. They elected someone, but then, of course, the rest of the world wanted diamonds and cobalt or whatever is there, and specifically the United States, deposed an elected leader after 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's just...
Yeah, the U.S.'s role in...
Not great.
This is not portrayed well, and it definitely makes me want to do some more research. It does not speak positively of that. And that's interesting. I feel like Leah, in particular, one of the characters, she carries a lot of guilt about that. Because as she becomes an adult and makes the choice whether she's going to go back to America or stay in Africa and have her family, she's very immersed in that, and she carries a lot of guilt for being American.
For being American, but of course her husband says, "But not you."
But
right?
Not you. But
But of course, I mean, there's how much does that actually mean? You know.
And of course, she can't take on the sins of the entire U.S. government. But it's interesting how that kind of plays out. The notes.
I'll take notes. I drink whiskey and what is it? I drink and I know things.
Yeah. Well, I'm the literature teacher, so I try to approach it with a little bit more of a critical eye here. I think it's interesting. One of the characters, Ada, she relies pretty heavily on the poetry of Emily Dickinson in her sections, and I enjoyed that. But of course, I thought, of course, it's Emily Dickinson. Who else would it have been? Because we don't really hear any male voices. So I like that there's one brief mention of William Carlos Williams and the So Much Depends Upon a Red Wheelbarrow.
That's for the
medical.
No, it's William C. Williams, so it's the same on both sides. That's why she likes it.
Well, but also because she wants to be a doctor, and he's a doctor who is a poet, and she writes poetry and cares about the medical side of things. So, but I thought it was interesting, but also, I don't know who else's poetic voice it would be if not for Dickinson at that time.
Sure. I think that the style of Dickinson fit Ada.
That's true as well. Without getting in too much to the end of the book and like giving away too much, I really liked the lineage that came out of the daughters. I thought that was really significant.
Yeah.
The lack of children, or the children that were born. There were no daughters.
Oh.
None of these women bore
I didn't even think about that.
Bore daughters because.
Well, there's only the one of them that has children.
Which I think is significant in itself.
I disliked Rachel for most of the book, and I still kind of disliked her into the end of the book, but she is a clear product of her situation, and she was steeped in it a little longer than everyone else. Although she becomes a strong female character.
Absolutely.
But
and she seizes her own power. She has her breaking point with her father, and then she takes her own power.
She's still unlikable at the end, though. So.
You don't have to be likable.
That's true.
You can be a strong woman without being likable.
Yeah.
Many of us are.
I can see why it almost won Pulitzer Prize. I think it's a fantastic work.
I would like to read a little bit more about Barbara Kingsolver. I did not. I intentionally do not do any research about an author until I'm done and have percolated on a book, because I don't want to commit that intentional fallacy, where we imbibe too much of their persona into their writing. But I'm curious. Obviously, she has a very expansive religious knowledge because
well, she lives in Kentucky, from what I understand, right?
My library sticker says local author, although I think Kentucky is a little far, but.
I bet that she probably was raised in a Southern Baptist.
She definitely has the knowledge. So whether or not she is devout or was raised in it and has left, which would be my assumption.
That would be my assumption from the book. Of course, you can't.
She definitely knows her liturgy, I guess, very, very deeply. One thing that I did find when I did just like a really quick search of it is that apparently this book has been optioned by Amy Adams' production company a couple years ago, and Barbara Kingsolver is working on.
About 5 years, right? You said it was.
Well, yes, but I'd like I'm subtracting 2 years for COVID.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. That's fair.
So, but apparently Barbara Kingsolver and Amy Adams were working on a screenplay for it, which I think sounds promising. I think it will make an exceptional movie or a super shitty movie. I think it has to be done really, really well. I think it has to be careful that...
It has to be cast well.
It cast well, and it needs to be directed by a black female. Yeah. Probably someone with roots to Africa, or with ties to Africa. I think that'd be pretty critical. Otherwise, I can see it getting too whitewashed, which would be...
Yeah, it'd be unfortunate.
Unfortunate, and just like also kind of defeat so much of what is in here. Like defeat the purpose. So, yeah, I definitely think it's worth a read. You know, this is...
It's a good book.
It's a good book.
I enjoyed it.
You're trying to wrap me up.
Trying to wrap you up a little bit.
No,
you didn't drink any of your coffee.
I drank a few sips. I was just trying to say who would like this. I mean, if you like historical fiction, if you like realistic fiction,
yeah, sometimes there are
family
books
dramas. It's a pretty expansive family.
I would call it a family drama.
That is very layered and has a lot to it.
You said that, and it's not exactly a genre, but you said realistic fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a genre? That's not a real genre. Like that's just.
I think it's a real genre. It's just realistic fiction. It's just not fantasy. It's not fae. It's not based on one specific event, which this kind of is. This is kind of historical fiction. But it also, I don't know, I think realistic fiction is a true genre. It's when you just read a book that could happen to a normal person.
Yeah. There are some books that I say, like, I think anybody could read this and like it. I think that some people might be offended by their sensibilities about things that are portrayed in it, but...
No, I think if you're going to be offended by it, then I think that perhaps this
was
written for you.
Oh yes, I mean, I think that. I'm not saying you shouldn't read it, I'm saying you might be offended by it.
Well, if you're offended by it, then I think you need to take another look at yourself.
But I think when we look at books that were nominated or have won Pulitzer Prizes, there probably are a few of them that I would think you would say you should read. You should.
Right.
Or you would say somebody, I'm not sure that's a great read.
The one sticking point is that you probably have to be willing to engage.
Yeah. I felt a little bit, especially at the beginning, that I wasn't sure if the story was developing. That it just seemed like snapshots of moments, right? And it wasn't exactly how it was stringing together.
Characters. It's so character heavy that you had to have those moments to color and paint those people that the story was going to then be about. But I think the whole thing is snapshots of moments.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a drama that has like it starts here, but it's like the life cycle over this period of time and how it unfolds. It's not particularly like a linear story that, I mean, it's linear in time in the sense that it takes place over a year and then the time after a year. But
it ends up taking the time over decades and decades by the end. I mean,
yes.
I think Rachel ends up she has had her 50th birthday, I think, by the time the book ends.
I guess what I mean is that they don't.
Rachel isn't the one that dies.
I guess what I mean is that it doesn't particularly set up a main conflict.
No.
If that makes sense.
Well,
I
agree with that, and I think that's because it's not a main conflict. It's not a historical fiction book where it's about this one event. This is about the family, and there's many little conflicts over the family. So I'd say this is like a generational
definitely
conflict. It's good. I don't know what we should read next.
I don't know.
But I'm picking.
Book club.
So if you got any recommendations on what we should partner read next, throw them my way. I need something different.
And if anybody wants to read with us, we could do like a Zoom video talk chat. That'd be fun. Anyway.
And there's our sign to be done.
Cheers.
Cheers.